Please bear with me, I'm very congested today. Our conference minister, Reverend Don Remick, sent out a pastoral letter via email recently. In it, he describes a scene that happened not long ago. He was in a doctor's office. There were several people there. The man, who looked to be in his 70s or 80s, spoke to no one in particular. He said, "This used to be a man's world." He spoke with a tone of ruefulness and bewilderment. Don said that the women who were working maintained their professional demeanor, but other women had expressions of bemusement and some of dismay. They all seemed to be familiar with that world and longed for it to be consigned to history. Honestly, I fully understand the phrase, "This used to be a man's world." It's the world I grew up in. I grew up with John Wayne, the ruggedly handsome cowboy that we knew as the Marlboro Man, who smoked cigarettes. Clint Eastwood with his .44 Magnum cocked, saying, "Go ahead, make my day." James Brown sang it, "It's a man's world." Men were the breadwinners and protectors. Women were the homemakers. My mom used to say, "I've never shown your dad where I keep the water in the kitchen." Machismo was prized, whether it be on the playing field or on the battlefield. We have all heard the phrase, "Those were the days when men were men, and the women were glad for it." Those of us who remember that world know that the gender roles were well defined, and few, if any, contemplated changing them. The TV show Father Knows Best captured that ethos precisely. We don't know exactly what that man in the doctor's office was thinking, but I do know that world in which I have lived, and I suspect I am not alone in this. I do know that world has changed, and I have the challenge of trying to adapt to the changing world. What that man seemed to be saying was that the rules have changed, and he doesn't know how or understand what the rules are anymore. We can point to various societal changes that have moved us into a different world. The civil rights movement changed many of our citizens' thinking about our country. Although it was mostly a male-led movement, yes, there was Rosa Parks, but the leadership of the civil rights movement were almost all men, and they treated women in very traditional ways. The women's movement obviously meant a major shift in many people's thinking of gender roles. It has been an interesting and dynamic process as women have emerged into leadership roles in the workplace and in government. Any man who has reported to women in business, like I have, knows that women tend to be very different bosses than men. And as I look back on my career in business, I can say that the best boss I ever had was a woman. The Me Too movement is the latest iteration of the women's movement. It is sickening to learn that sexual assault is so pervasive. We have many problems in our society. It is about time a bright light is shone on that issue, and it is a high time that radical changes are made. Domestic violence and sexual assault must be addressed and stopped. Roles in the home have changed for many. I'm in the category of men who make less money than their wives. I also do the cooking and the laundry, although I'm not authorized to do Meg's laundry. It seems I'm not capable of learning how to do that properly. Certainly, there are many households that are still along gender lines, and there are many Americans who think of people of color in traditional ways. That said, many views have changed. The gay rights movement has represented another change and why in the way Americans think about sexual orientation and gender identification. Society has a hard time adapting to changes like these. Entities like the U.S. military have struggled to find a way to adjust to these kinds of changes. Churches are not exempt. Many churches do not welcome members of the gay community and do not allow gay weddings in their sanctuary. And I'm proud to say that Union Church is open and affirming. As with other movements that I have mentioned, there are some whose view of homosexuality is unchanged. In the mix of all of this is the hottest button issue of our times in America: abortion. Churches and those who populate them are in the thick of this issue. That is an issue that the lines are as hardened as any. One side believes strongly that abortion takes human life. The other side believes strongly that women have the right to control their own bodies. There doesn't seem to be any way of mutual understanding on that issue. I would like to tell you what I strongly believe. Jesus spent his time outside the establishment of his day and called that world out. He lifted up the dignity of those who were marginalized, those who were excluded and wounded by the culture that used and abused them. Our gospel lesson of our story of the woman at the well is but one example. Jesus listened to the stories of the disenfranchised. He empowered their voices and condemned them, the abuse that was normalized in that culture. He listened still to the stories of the women who dare reveal the pain and the shame that they have endured and will continue to endure because they have the courage to speak. And he understands the fear triggered by those who hold and hide their stories because the painful consequences of speaking is more frightening than holding the unhealed, unspoken wounds. Jesus calls us, me, into making a different world. It is a world that can only be fully realized when it is shaped by the voices and the stories of those who have been abused, ignored, threatened, excluded, and marginalized. Church is and should be a safe place where people can share their stories and know that they will be heard, held, and honored. As a pastor, it is a profound moment when I hear a story that has been held for years. The church must always be the place of sanctuary for those who are in need. Living the love and the justice of Jesus is what we are called to do. I commit myself to taking responsibility for my part in the unfolding of Christ's realm. And I pray that you will too. Amen.